Caught in the grip of our ancestral fears, few species terrify us as much as the great white shark. Many old sailors' tales or stories blown up over time have given rise to horrifying legends. Throughout the world, sharks are responsible for only 5 or 6 fatal attacks each year, yet they always make the headlines as the very incarnation of evil. An obsession fostered daily, for example, by the film Jaws, which threw some moviegoers into fits of terror. One man, Graeme Duane, decided to encounter this species at close range without protection. A face-to-face between 2 super predators revealing that these misunderstood creatures are neither good nor evil, but rather curious and opportunist. So before they disappear victims of humans, it is time to replace our fears with a natural fascination.
The great white is the big fear for everybody, and for people who know sharks as well. It's the most intimidating for sure. For me, the worst type of great white is the one that's in my mind before the dive. So it's the imaginary shark for me. So before I go to dive, that's when I'm the most afraid, because you tend to imagine all the things that could actually go wrong.
Torn between apprehension and curiosity, cameraman and professional diver Graeme Duane gave in to the temptation to get close to these creatures, despite their terrifying reputation.
Once we're actually on the water and we see the sharks for the first time, that fear begins to not completely go away, but you can control it much more efficiently. It's quite a strange feeling. You'll probably never have so little in your mind at one time. You're completely focused on that animal swimming towards you. The only thing in your mind is trying to work out which way that animal is going to turn, and whether it's going to turn or whether it's going to continue coming towards you. So I would say fear doesn't actually even have a place.
A fertile feast for our imagination, these creatures of darkness lurk in the immensity of the ocean's depths. Vicious killers for some, jaws of the devil for others. For centuries, sharks have provoked deep fears, fears continuously encouraged by the media. At the least alert, the newspapers invade our daily lives with shocking headlines and photos. We shiver at the very mention of sharks, as though these monsters were at our door, waiting to tear us apart. Wherever we go in the world, we encounter the same feelings.
I'm very afraid of sharks.
Dangerous species.
They eat a lot of people.
They're the predators.
Not knowing where they are exactly.
They seem scary.
Because they can just come out of nowhere and just bite your leg or something.
So I haven't swum in the sea for the last 25 years because of sharks.
Blood, being bitten, danger.
I'm a little bit worried because I know there are white sharks between Corsica and Sardinia.
And everything that you know about sharks is horror.
Bad publicity.
The films, the movies I've seen, it's always scary and scary, so...
Juice.
For 30 years now, an unforgettable scene from a movie has haunted our seaside holidays. few notes of music, a slender young girl, an infinite blue sea, and the talent of a young director were enough to turn the film Jaws into a universal nightmare. Impossible for anyone who has seen this film to remain indifferent. It awakened in us our ancestral fears. Now fiction might become reality. It all began in 1975 when Steven Spielberg decided to adapt Peter Benchley's novel to the screen. At that time, neither the author nor the director imagined the repercussions their respective works would have. In 1973, when Peter Benchley wrote Jaws, he was already friends with the writer Richard Ellis. A real fan of sea monsters, Ellis devotes his drawings and writing to the undersea world, a passion he gladly shares with his old friend. Whether the creatures are real or imaginary, he enjoys sketching them, coloring them, watching them come to life on his magician's drawing board.
I like predators anyway. So I really like the way they look. They have these marvelous black eyes, which seem soulless and aggressive in the same way. I think what happened with Jaws was partially an accident and partially intentional on Benchley's part. He managed to select a real terror, a real monster, if you will. Because here in New York, when we look at the Empire State Building, for example, nobody expects to see a giant gorilla climbing up the Empire State Building. So we know that King Kong was fantasy. But what Benchley did was he chose a real animal, and a real animal that had a history of biting people. Because in 1916, there were a series of attacks in New Jersey that Benchley knew about. He chose an animal that is out there swimming around, and he chose an animal that is known to occasionally attack people. So when the book got published and became a bestseller, it was largely because people were able to think of it in terms of, if I go in the ocean, there's this creature out there that can bite me. And so people became frightened.
The striking images of the film highlighted the genius of the author.
So that in addition to the reality of the animal, you are looking at a brilliantly made movie. And what happened, of course, is that everybody who saw the movie or even heard about the movie began to think, okay, there is this real nasty animal out there. And from that moment on, there are a great many people who, when they think about jumping in the water, change their minds and they say, well, maybe I won't do that.
On the heels of this success, Peter Benchley made frequent public appearances, acclaimed by his readers and moviegoers. But after years of fame, he was overcome by feelings of guilt. He began to realize that a hunt had begun for the wicked man-eaters. Early on, he had probably already seen that it was just the beginning of a massacre that would never end. Peter Benchley decided then to participate in numerous seminars and conferences devoted to the protection of sharks, his own way undoubtedly of trying to stop what he had unwittingly started.
Hey?
It's not.
Come, by Daddy's hand here, look.
When I did see Jaws, there was a whole media hype going on around the film, and at that point, diving with sharks was never on anybody's agenda.
Ah, it's a shark.
No, it's a whale.
It's not a whale.
I think the great whites are the most accessible big shark
What's that there?
for the media to capitalize on. And I think that's the reason why they've received a lot of, let's say, bad press in the past.
Oh, what happened?
It's fairly easy to take a camera and get shots of a great white biting a cage or biting bait or, snapping on the surface.
You know, this is the kind of shark that Daddy swims with sometimes.
What is it called?
It's the great white.
I think humans have an inherent fear dialed into their brain already, and I think the movie of Jaws basically reinforced that thread in our brains somewhere.
Throughout the ages, humans have been able to use fear to their benefit. Psychologist Stephanie Stöber studies the mechanisms of fear.
Fear is originally something very meaningful. It is also very important for the survival of human beings. Fear is comparable to pain. The fact of feeling fear has, in many situations, brought big advantages to humans. The fact of avoiding dangerous situations is very meaningful. Fear takes root in the brain very quickly, as well as in the subconscious, and one quickly avoids situations that trigger it off.
In most cases, this ability to recognize what endangers us is life-saving, but occasionally it results in the simple fear of the unknown.
The fear of sharks comes from the fact that most people who do not dare to get into the water have no experience with sharks. They only know what they heard in the media or what they've been told. So it is more a fear that is based on a projection. You project your fears onto an object. The shark has great big teeth, which makes it the ideal candidate for the projection of our fears.
Unwittingly, these elegant adventurers have become perfect scapegoats. They channel our essential anxieties, which, fueled daily, continue to exist. Professor Lothar Mikos of the University of Berlin keeps an eye on this growing phenomenon.
Nowadays, we're living in a time when the media tend to sensationalize things precisely in order to arouse the audience emotionally. And it is surely more interesting for a journalist to report that a shark has bitten a surfer again in Australia or elsewhere, rather than announcing that 20 surfers came back safe and sound from the bay once more. These are the media laws. And of course, that conveys a kind of cultural consciousness of danger, or something like that. And for all the people who have no personal experience with sharks, it naturally poses a problem. Because here in Germany, where can one meet a shark, except in a large aquarium?
With today's technology, fears can be maintained over great distances.
Everything can be broadcast around the world instantaneously. So when somebody gets bitten by a shark in Florida or Australia or anywhere, you read about it within half an hour of it happening. And since everybody is tuned in and everybody is wired to this kind of network, it doesn't have to be a biology network, it's just news, and everybody's got the news constantly circulating, so they hear about it immediately, and then somebody else puts it together with another shark attack that took place 6 months ago or 6 weeks ago, and suddenly you get a sense that sharks are attacking people all over the world all the time, which of course isn't happening at all. And of course, as everybody knows, by this time you have a much greater chance of being struck by lightning than being attacked by a shark. But even somebody whose ankle is brushed by the sandpapery skin of a shark sees themselves as being attacked by a shark. It gets to be newsworthy, and it stays. It doesn't disappear When people are attacked by pigs or bitten by bees, that has a temporary life, and then you forget about it, or stung by bees. Shark attacks seem to linger forever, so people are always remembering, and they're putting them in the Jaws context.
Looking for strong new sensations, people from around the world have been attracted to a town called Gansbay near Cape Town in South Africa. For thrill seekers, this site is incomparable. It is here that Graeme Duane and his teammates have joined up to dive into the heart of the great white shark's domain. As with any amusement park, everything is organized to accommodate large numbers of tourists, and no effort has been spared to attract them.
The reasons why people go out on cage dives in places like Gansbaai, I think, are quite numerous, but I think I can safely say that a couple of them are probably, trying to dispel a fear of sharks, maybe trying to fuel a fear of sharks in some perverse way, and I think what's happening more and more recently is that that fear of sharks is being replaced with a fascination. And because of the greater access to bigger sharks for the man in the street, anybody can go down and confront a great white. And I think people are discovering that sharks are actually far more accessible than just being the object of fear. They're incredible creatures. And I'd like to think that the cage diving industry is going to evolve into a mechanism that delivers people to sharks on that basis.
Hey, Brian.
Hello, Graeme.
Hey, all right.
Nice to see you again.
Good, Rosie, how's it?
Hey, long time no see, Graeme. How you been?
Yeah, good, thanks. Should we go?
Thanks, man.
Yeah, how's the water? Where are we off to?
We've got about a week of bad weather now, rain and storms here, the Cape storms, and it seems like you brought all the luck. Look at this beautiful weather, calm sea, great visibility, and good sharks.
Good, man. Let's go.
Let's do it. Okay, let's go.
Accompanied by his friends, who are all familiar with the region and its particular weather conditions, Graeme heads towards Dyer Island, where great white sharks should be found. These small islands, home to hundreds of seals, the shark's favorite food, indicate an imminent arrival at the destination.
Teamwork in the shark situation is very, very important because we need people to have different jobs simultaneously. I'll be with the camera, I'll often have another guy with the camera, but then we'll have people who look after us, guys who spot behind us, guys with spear guns that tap off sharks that come too close to us, and there's a huge element of trust in that setup. The guy I dive with who's going to look after me with the great whites really has to have my trust. I need to know the guy, I need to know his ability, and I need to know that he's going to do what's required of him without me even looking at him. I have no doubt that sharks have enough intelligence to learn processes that mean food for them at the end of the day. It knows that that sound is the sound that goes off before the fish starts struggling. It's learned that.
Before freediving, Graeme must anticipate the visibility, an element of fundamental importance. Charles Maxwell, his diving partner among the great whales, appears quite relaxed.
8 to 10.
There we go.
The great whites have the biggest variation in character day to day. I mean, behaviors that you see. I'm not naive enough to say that it's communication, but I think there are signals that you can read. that give you suggestions of the mood it's in or what move it's going to make next, or what you can do or how far you can push yourself with that shark.
Good, let's go.
Let's wait and see what else comes along. We'll see if anything changes, because this guy's swimming quite fast at the moment. Yeah.
When you look at a shark, it's not an animal that you can describe with love. For me, it's an animal that's impressive. They look like stealth fighters. They look like they're made out of steel. So my relationship, if you can call it that, with sharks is, first of all, one of huge respect. And I think as soon as I lose that respect, I'm in trouble.
Well, on a day like today, it's a real privilege to have so many sharks to be able to deal with. But I must admit, I'm feeling a little bit apprehensive about the possibility of freediving on a day like today, purely because the behavior of these sharks is not suggestive of them being very restful or peaceful. They seem to be in feeding mode. And I'm seeing quite a few fast breaches on the bait that we have off the side of the boat. That's not an ideal situation for me.
Sometimes the realm of nature is not tame and can let you know that you are not welcome. To swim with the lords of the ocean, Graeme will have to come back another time.
I have to respect the behavior of that shark. And that's quite a difficult thing sometimes because it's an addictive activity.
It was off Sunrise Beach that Ahmad Hassem made the acquaintance of a great white shark, but his encounter quickly turned into a nightmare.
It's one of the most scariest things you can imagine, having your legs stuck in a great white's mouth that, you know, you don't know if you're going to get out of it alive or if this is the end for you. Immense nervousness. You're so nervous that it's unbelievable. You're basically shaking in your boots, knowing that there's something that size in the water with you and you've got nothing else to protect you.
In August 2006, while Ahmad and his 17-year-old brother, both lifeguards, were training 200 meters off the beach, Ahmad observed a shark approaching his brother and immediately placed himself in the shark's path.
Back to Louisiana's favorite music.
At that moment when the shark actually grabbed me, all I felt was this pressure being put on my leg itself. At that time I was being moved on the water. It's only such things that you can actually see on movies when, you know, people are being moved by the shark in the water. I was being moved for a while and I was being dragged for about 75 meters. I got this burning sensation in my lungs, which was so bad that I couldn't actually do it. So I told myself, well, Ahmad, you got two choices here. You're either going to get eaten alive or you basically gonna just drown. And I told myself, well, drowning is the best option at that moment. So I immediately decided I'm gonna fight back, and I started immediately going for the eye, which I really couldn't get into because every time I went for the eye, it sort of closed itself. I was actually riding on the side of its head, so I just started kicking with the foot that was free against its head. And in doing this motion, I was sort of kicking myself free. If this was my leg, it actually put me here, And with every kick I gave, it sort of ripped. It just kept ripping with every kick. So sort of, its teeth was basically sliding on the bone the whole time. And eventually when it got to my ankle just popped off and yeah, I was free, which I thought.
After freeing himself from the giant's jaws, Ahmad believed he could reach the shore, but the shark renewed its attack. At that precise moment, Ahmad saw his brother's hand reach out and haul him aboard the lifeboat. Between life and death, he was transported by helicopter to the hospital. Surprisingly, he recovered from his injuries within a few months.
I was just probably in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yeah, so you can't really be angry at sharks, it's themselves. So it's us in their territory. And, you know, basically they're just doing what sharks do. And I mean, that's sort of, you know, try and get a meal so now and then and stuff like that. Yeah, there's basically no one to blame.
One thing that strikes me as amazing when I hear about a shark attack on this coast, and having heard the response of the victim, is most of the time the incredible understanding that person has. It's incredible, given the amount of fear and horror that surrounds sharks. These people that have actually lost parts of their body, in some cases, will say to you, well, I don't blame the shark, you know. It's just doing what it does. And to me, that's quite a reaction for someone who's seen an animal under terrifying circumstances. And if people in the street can take a leaf out of that book and have that sort of attitude towards sharks, then I think in the future they'll have far more chance.
Accompanied by his wife Tessa and their 2 boys, Graeme Duane prepares to try his luck again in the shark's jealously guarded territory.
My wife has certain reservations, obviously, about what I do. I must say, since I've had children, I have become a lot more responsible in what I do. I won't spend as many days in the water with sharks. I'm far more hesitant to get into the water if I'm not sure. I think she knows what goes on, but I just hope she trusts that I do have some sort of responsibility hidden somewhere. It's the same as your mother. You don't tell your mother everything, you know, otherwise she worries about you, so. If you ask why I freedive with great whites, it seems like a silly thing to do, but when you actually see it happening, and if you could experience it, it's the most incredible experience I've ever had in my life. I'm not a shark expert, but I have learned to read certain behaviors, and I do trust my own judgment in a freediving situation with most species, provided I can have a choice on conditions and the nature of the animal that I work with.
The weather is fair, the visibility exceptional, and the sharks are peaceful. Perfect conditions.
Charles, how's it looking, Graeme? Good. Look at that visibility. Yeah, dark. Yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. I think this is the spot. Yeah. Sometimes it's very quick. You watch the shark for maybe 3 or 4 turns of the boat and you can tell what you need to know about the temperament. Other times you might see a behavior that doesn't impress you so much and or is maybe a little bit aggressive, and you wait a bit longer to see if the shark settles down. But today, from what I've seen, it looks good. I would happily get in the water right now.
Right, Rosie? We're going to need some weights for the bottom of the
Within
cage.
minutes, everyone is at their station to check their equipment and be ready to spring into action if necessary.
Secured on nicely.
Shark is on your right! On your right!
Okay, everything for trauma, PP cups, multi-trauma dressings, IVs, splints, bandages, everything to cover emergency.
The difference between scuba diving and free diving when you approach sharks is huge. If you dive with scuba and you approach sharks, they don't like the exhaust of your bubbles coming out of the scuba tank. They tend to keep their distance from that. They don't like the noise of your regulator.
Like a fish, Graeme swims down towards the depths. And the giant allows itself to be accompanied by this man without bubbles.
I think if you have the right situation from a freediving perspective, and certainly from a camera work perspective, the great white is the most approachable because it approaches you so much closer than other species.
Because of the low water temperature, Graeme can't remain much more than 2 minutes in the shark's vicinity. But carried away by the joy of the experience, he barely takes the time to catch his breath before diving back down.
I think sharks are really efficient, but I think their efficiency lies not so much as hunters, but more as survivors. I think a shark's failure rate in hunting might be fairly high, but it's very efficient at working out what's a threat and what's not a threat to it. A great white knows exactly what's on its menu. My experience of them is that they're very, very careful in their observations, investigations, and approaches to whatever they're looking at. They'll only go into a full-blooded attack when everything is sure. And I think the way that it explores foreign things in the water is a very calculated way, and it's a very careful way, and it has different circles that it moves into. You know, for me, being able to interact with a 4-meter great white says volumes about the way it goes about its business. It's not just a mindless killer, it's investigating all the time.
Graeme, being neither a menace nor a prey, demonstrated that respect is the key to close contact with this giant of the ocean. The small port city of Carry-le-Rouet is located near Marseille on the Mediterranean coast. It is here that Muriel Gillet settled down a few years ago, braving her fear of the ocean. Since adolescence, she has been a victim of anxiety. An anxiety neither explained nor rationalized, but overwhelming. At the simple mention of the sea, she is overcome by stress that arouses in her a feeling of imminent danger. Her life resembles an eternal nightmare.
It all started with the film Jaws that I saw when I was 12. This film really upset me because at the time it was a film that was very strong, very violent, very powerful. And that was really a terrible shock for me.
"30 years have passed, but Muriel is still under the shock. She has developed a phobia and cannot imagine ever swimming again for fear that a shark will rise up and devour her.
I've always had the impression that it's around me, that it will attack me. At 12 years old, you watch a film like that. We watch it with children's eyes, actually. And I lost interest even though I was a very good swimmer. I love the water. It got to a point where I didn't even want to go in the water. And now I've been living by the sea for the last 5 years. And it's true that living by water and never going for a swim, I just turned 40 and I need to take the step. And I told myself, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it.
Frédéric Lecan, specialist in cognitive behavioral therapy, treats patients suffering from anxiety.
A phobia is an extreme, unreasonable fear that one cannot control. In this case, it's going into the water and having recurring images, telling yourself that this can really happen, this could be me. So memory has a very important role, associating an experience and situation with an emotional reality.
Muriel projects the stress that she experienced watching the film into present-day reality. For several months, she has been seeing Frédéric Lecan to try to overcome her phobia, hoping to soon be able to enjoy swimming in the sea again. This therapy is based on the principle that the patient must become conscious of the unreasonable and excessive nature of her fear. Then, step by step, she will confront it and learn to control her anxiety.
With cognitive behavioral therapies, we can enable the person to control their anxiety so that it no longer handicaps and debilitates their daily life.
The first phase consists in confronting pictures. Then, if all goes well, a real-life situation will be set up.
So, how's it been going since last time?
Fine.
So, through the progression of the therapy, the idea is to understand your emotions and thoughts when you're confronted with the image. If you feel that the anxiety becomes too much, we'll stop and do the respiratory exercises that we already went over together before. So, tell me, when you look at this image, what do you feel?
I see the photo and I begin having hot flushes and my chest tightens. I imagine that the shark will circle around the diver and try to attack him.
Okay.
I find that the teeth are red. He still has blood in his mouth. This is something that I just can't handle.
We're going to do a little breathing. There, just for a minute. Just enough to lower your anxiety level. Put your hand on your stomach. Do you feel that your anxiety level is starting to drop?
A little.
Okay, let's continue. Here is another image. When you see this image, what emotion do you feel?
This one is horrible.
Okay.
9.
You're at 9 there.
Oh, yes. Actually, this photo makes me think of the scene in the film when the shark comes onto the boat and grabs the man in his jaws. No matter where it is in a photo, on the TV, or even in an ad. Because there are a lot of ads with sharks, so...
I'm going to show you this one. What crosses your mind?
It's really hard too. There are moments in which it's the boat, it's the guy being attacked, and where he's swallowed up, but this one is the lady who is attacked at the very beginning of the film. And he pulls her under, and it's me that it's attacking, not the person in the film.
Breathe, breathe.
I didn't think that it would be so hard.
Tell me what's happening.
When they're on the boat, and it swallows up the man in its jaws. I can't do it. I don't know why it's so hard today.
At the National Museum in Vienna, Professor Ernst Mikshi studies the origins of our fears.
The evolution of man most certainly took place in the savannah, which means our tendency to learn new things, being physiological, sensorial, or physical, in order to survive, come from that savannah. And that is why we get on much better with lions than we do with sharks. It probably hangs on the fact that an aquatic environment is generally dangerous for a terrestrial mammal. Such situations must be approached in a very precise way, a very conscious way. This is generally why we feel fear, and our concentration proportionally is at its maximum. But when you add the image of the shark, which to our senses is absolutely non-perceptible, and against which we have no means of defense because of our constitution, the very natural fear of being in the water turns into a panic. And this panic, this hysteria, is exactly what inspired Spielberg's classic movie. So the reason for our fear of sharks comes most probably from our evolution.
The fear that we experience today concerning sharks comes from the time of the first great travelers. These sailors' tales claim that numerous monstrous creatures inhabit the seas and swallow ships and their crews. Aristotle, the son of a doctor, was the first to try to understand and describe the behavior of sharks. In 343 BC, this philosopher and scientist wrote his Historia Animalium, a fundamental work on animal biology that was considered authoritative until the 16th century. Inspired by the years he had lived by the sea in Macedonia, he produced a body of knowledge that rapidly became more important than that of the best naturalists. He set up a classification of species which was quite advanced and described the characteristics of sea rays and sharks that he had already assigned to the same family. His knowledge appears quite incredible even today. By means of his painstaking work, Aristotle was probably trying to distance himself from the mythical accounts like those of Herodotus, which were considered the major reference until then. 160 years earlier, the historical accounts of Herodotus had impressed his contemporaries. In particular, that in which the ships of the Persian fleet were blown ashore by violent gusts. The 20,000 soldiers aboard the ships perished, crushed on the rocks, or devoured. The terrifying legend of the man-eating shark was taking root in the collective consciousness.
We can say since Shakespeare. In Macbeth, for example, the witches use for the preparation of their magic potion, among other things, the dorsal fin of a dangerous shark. When one thinks about the image depicted by Hemingway in his novel The Old Man and the Sea, in which a mako shark is admirably described, one thinks of Bertolt Brecht and the lament of Mac the Knife from his Threepenny Opera. So, sharks are often mentioned, but this only has a sense if the image of the shark evokes the same to its respective readers.
The origin of the fear of sharks is surely to be found in the natural fear of the unknown, a fear that some cultures have maintained throughout the centuries. Elsewhere, close to the ocean, other populations see sharks differently.
In every case, sharks are well respected. They are sometimes even venerated as gods. There exists in Polynesia the legend of the shark god Kahuhu, who lives in a cave and swallows trespassing humans. So sharks are very dangerous, but are at the same time considered as gods. In the Solomon Islands, the souls of the deceased are to be changed into sharks, which is why they do not hunt them. It is even said that sharks save shipwrecked people by bringing them back to dry land. The fly in the ointment being that they only save the inhabitants of the coasts and not those of the interiors.
Divinities or creatures of the devil, sharks haunt our imagination.
I think that great whites are looking at swimmers and looking at surfers far more often than we believe, exponentially more often than we believe. And they're obviously not going into attack, because I think the amount of times that sharks look at humans and the amount of times that sharks attack humans are vastly different. And I think my freediving proves that.
Graeme Duane hopes to rehabilitate the reputation of the big sharks. He wants to film them up close in order to share the relationship that he has developed with them. His wife seems to approve of his efforts and supports him in spite of her apprehensions.
Graham's job is a very unusual job. I mean, it's not many wives that have to deal with their husbands doing such a dangerous thing every day, but it's something you get used to, I think. I think the more often he does it, the more often he comes home without any problems, the happier we feel. I try not to think about it too much, to be honest, when he's out there. I prefer not to know that he's going to definitely be swimming with the sharks, because some days he goes out and they're just on the boat and he's not actually in the water with the sharks. So I like to think that maybe he's just going to be on the boat today and not actually diving with them. I'm quite excited for him when I see how excited he is and how much he loves what he does. Also, I know he's not a big risk taker. He actually does think and assess the situation.
I think I could say that the great white, to me, is like a gatekeeper. So as soon as you're overboard, they're the first thing there in front of you, almost saying, what are you doing in my domain? What do you want with me? What do you want with the ocean? You got to get by me. That's the intimidating sense that I get from a great white. The body language that I would apply depends on the nature of the animal I'm working with. But once I've got the shark swimming comfortably close to me and that element of trust has been built up, I can then start to try and get below the shark, filming up. And I can sometimes get it to swim over me, which is a different perspective. I can sometimes even touch the animal if I'd wanted to. I don't often do, but there are lots of occasions where I can actually touch a white shark. I think obviously with a great white, any sort of human-shark contact, unprotected, says a lot in many ways. And for me, apart from being an amazing experience, just a touch is quite groundbreaking. I don't think people riding on top of sharks and forcing themselves onto unwilling animals is that nice, but I think it's appropriate if you can illustrate what sort of animal the great white really is. And holding on to that dorsal and feeling it pull you voluntarily is quite a sensation. It feels like something that's bunched up with latent energy. It's actually quite incredible. But holding on to the dorsal fin, I mean, it's almost as if dorsal fins were designed to be held onto. The skin is nice and rough, and then feeling your weight being taken up by your hand on the dorsal as the shark pulls you away, and looking down over the front of the head. So you almost have a shark's POV as you're getting pulled along, is quite an amazing feeling.
Today, some passionate individuals are working to change our view of these creatures. But it will probably take many years before the death of more than 100 million sharks each year arouses as much emotion and as many headlines as the death of a single swimmer.